It was a great turnout. You were wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. I think it was a great evening. It looked like a full house. Seems like everyone enjoyed it. I know I did.
We thoroughly enjoyed it. And those little ones, weren't they funny?
Oh, they were grand. I really, really enjoy thoroughly working with the children. They are so entertaining.
Oh, my. And celebrating Aunt Jenny's
Good evening,
life.
everybody.
This was just
I'm so glad that you've all come to join us on this spooky afternoon or evening. I hope to tell you some things that maybe you have heard about Aunt Jenny and a lot that you haven't heard. I'm going to tell you about Aunt Jenny and her life, and then I'm going to try to tell you about a few of the herbs and things that I think Aunt Jenny would have used in her medicine making. And then we're going to do some of the legends and the ghost tales about Aunt Jenny. As we all know her, was born in 1826. Her name was Louisa Elizabeth Jane Bates. She married Willis Brooks Sr., and all they ever wanted was to live the American dream just like you and I. She came from Kentucky, met Mr. Willis. They moved in over to the Bankhead Forest. Of course, during those days, it was known as the Black Warrior Mountains. They purchased and farmsteaded about 120 acres, and then they had 10 children. One of those 10 children had died in childbirth, and this left them with 9 healthy children. Everything was going well for the Brooks family until that terrible thing we called the Civil War. And as with so many other folks across this nation of ours, things became quite different and very sad very quickly. Aunt Jenny's husband and oldest son, John, were like most other hill country folk around these parts. They didn't want any part of the Civil War, whether it be the North or the South. They wanted to remain neutral, and they just simply wanted to be left alone to live their lives as they had up to that point. But on the other hand, you had the Union that was after them and recruiting them. You had the Confederates who wanted them to serve on the southern side. And unfortunately, there was a terrible, not necessarily a battle, but I guess what we would call a skirmish happened along the Old Byler Road there, very near the Brooks family farm. And though there are many varying tales, to the best of my ability, I have discovered that this was the case that happened with the Brooks family. When this skirmish took place, there were obviously some soldiers left dead, some Union soldiers, either on or very near the Brooks family property. It is said that those Confederates said, "You leave them laying. You let the varmints and the vultures have them. They don't deserve a decent burial, so you leave them laying." Of course, now I ask you, if it was your worst enemy, would you leave a dead body laying there? Of course not. And neither did the Brooks family. So they buried these men. But that only added to the trouble, because it is said that the Confederates looked upon this and says, "Well, then if you're not for us, you must be against us." A group of home guards came in, and either during one or two, there again, through research, I believe it was 2 different incidents, they killed, brutally tortured and killed Willis Sr. and Aunt Jenny's oldest son, John. After these events, it is said that Aunt Jenny rounded up the remaining boys, and she made them lay their hands on the bodies and swear that every man involved would pay with their lives for what they had done to her family. Aunt Jenny lived to be 98 years old, but by the time she died at 98, all 10 children were gone but one. All 5 sons, it is said, died by some type of gun wound. 4 of them, we know exactly what happened to them. Henry died at his whiskey still there in Bankhead National Forest, down in the holler behind the Brooks family property. Gainham was shot and killed by Henry Hubbard. Mack, he disappeared on the Oklahoma gun trail. Willis Junior was killed during a gunfight in Oklahoma, and on that same day, a grandson was also killed. Daughters, some of them lived to be a little older, even died at what we would have considered a very young age. Because it has been said many times a parent should never outlive a child, right? But she outlived 9 of them. The only one of her children that would live to be older and actually be considered an old age when she died was Angeline. Aunt Jenny, even after all of her loss and grief, though, became a very notable character in these parts. She is known throughout North Alabama and even much farther than that. People north, out west, they contact me and they ask me, especially her descendants, asking me questions about her. But what people really don't know about Aunt Jenny, in spite of all the things that they're told, is how good of a person Aunt Jenny actually was. She was known throughout the Bankhead National Forest as being somebody that if you needed a doctor, you called Aunt Jenny. And she would go to her patients and she would stay and doctor them and nurture them, and it didn't matter what time of the day or night. She was a midwife. She delivered all of these babies. It is also said that she never charged a penny. Now, that's not to say that people didn't pay her, and they bartered with her, and of course paid her in some type of manner for her work and her skills. But they said Aunt Jenny would go and stay with these mothers 3 weeks or longer at a time until the mother was back on their feet. She really did love people. And people loved Aunt Jenny that knew her. They had great respect for Aunt Jenny. But over the years and through all the loss and all the horrible things that happened to Aunt Jenny, they learned a deeper respect. And that was that you did not mess with her family. Because if you did, it would not be wise to turn your back. Because you might dearly pay with your life. She was very, very protective. The older she got, the more she lost. She was determined to protect what she had left. And she did that very well also. Aunt Jenny was quoted in an early 1920s newspaper in Birmingham regarding those men that had done these terrible deeds. She was quoted as saying, "They've all been gotten but one." Quite possibly, she handled a couple of those individuals herself. So people tend to have a bad taste in their mouth. They say, well, she was a murderer. She was a killer. But I want you to understand, it was a different time. We are so blessed to live in the times that we have. We have things hard sometimes. But folks, during the Civil War, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, it was very, very tough. And again, Aunt Jenny lived in the middle of the forest. You didn't have Walmart. You didn't have the grocery store. You couldn't just run out to McDonald's tonight and buy dinner. You either grew it or hunted it, or you did without.
Aunt Jenny was one tough lady, wasn't she, Carla?
Yes, ma'am. No time for sitting around and crying, was there?
She took care of everything.
Take care of business and get on with it. And it was going to be one of those all-day and overnight trips, as things were back then. Traveling to town took an all-day and all-night thing. And the young son left, and that evening, Mr. Wilson, he intended to head to the woods to go hunting. Miss Wilson, she begged him not to go. She pleaded with him to wait until the sun came back. Wait till the next night. You're not well enough to go on your own. Something could happen. But he insisted. He'd been around them woods long enough. He knew them like the back of his hand. And so he went on. He and the dogs took down through the woods. The next day when the son returned home, however, he found a very distraught mother waiting on him. She had been up crying all night, worried sick. She told him that the father had gone off hunting with the dogs and had not returned. So he immediately saddled up his horse and he took off down through the woods. Wasn't long till he found his father. His father was in terrible, terrible shape. Laying over to the side was those 2 prized hound dogs, and they had absolutely been mauled to death. The father lived only long enough to tell the story about what had happened. On that particular night, when those old prized hounds began to bay and tree, what they had found was no coon at all, but a black panther. Mr. Wilson, not ever expecting it, didn't even have time to react before this panther attacked. Trying to save his dogs, the panther turned on him, and they all three died that night. But they say that Mr. Wilson is still walking those woods protecting his land. And they say that if you're walking those trails on a dark night, way off in the distance you may suddenly hear the sound of a man screaming, "I thought I told you to stay off of my land!" And so they say that Mr. Wilson is still with us today. Now remember, that story was what? True or false? Totally false. It did last year. Anyway, still, even without that, the power of the story, right? There are many, many, however, ghost tales that are told across our great state. If you like that kind of thing, I encourage you to check it out. Go on the web and just look up Alabama Ghost Stories or Alabama Ghost. There is a link that says Haunted Places in Alabama, and it is a mile long. Colleges, Judson College, which my daughter attended, oh, there's many reports there. The University of Alabama, Smith Hall, Montevallo, Mobile, up in Florence at the Sweetwater Plantation, over in Decatur. There's several stories about Union and Civil War ghosts. But folks, I have had, unable to count them, just around us here in our area, the people who will come and tell me personal accounts and experiences of paranormal things or supernatural things, those things that I can't explain to you. All of those stories are amazing. So whether it be a ghost story, a personal family story, or something from history, tell your family and share it. Once upon a time, there was an old hotel set in the middle of this nice little country town. There was an event going on this particular weekend, and it seemed that every room there was booked. This man came along, though, and he was traveling through town, and he wanted a room. And he didn't care how he had to get it. He just needed a place to lay down. He wanted a room. So he goes into the clerk, and he tells her, he said, "Ma'am, I'm worn out. I need a place to sleep." She says, "Sir, I understand, but every room is booked." He said, "Ma'am, don't you have anything? Anything?" He said, I'll take anything just to get some rest tonight." She said, "Well, sir, there is one room, but we don't rent it out because nobody will stay in it." He said, "What do you mean nobody will stay in it?" She said, "Well, it's haunted." He said, Oh, I don't believe in ghosts. I'll take it. Just give me the key. I'll take it." So the clerk gives him the key. The man goes upstairs. He gets ready to go to bed, pulls the covers back. Just about the time he starts to get comfortable, the closet door opens up, and out across the floor come these two bloody hands saying, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." The man turns around and he takes one look at those bloody hands. He jumps up, grabs his suitcase, down the stairs he goes, run past the receptionist saying, you're right, I'm not staying." Well, a few hours later, here comes a lady. Same thing, she's just begging for a room. Anything, she'll take it. Well, she gives her the same story, and she gives her the key to the room. So she goes upstairs. She goes in, she takes her a shower, puts on her nightgown, and climbs into bed. And out of that closet comes those bloody fingers. Bloody fingers. Bloody fingers. The woman almost has a heart attack. She jumps up and forget her suitcase. In her nightgown, down the steps and out the front door of the hotel she goes, screaming all the way. Well, a few hours later, same sad story. Here comes along this man. He says he's a musician, and he's been in concert, and he's been playing music, and he is just exhausted. He's worn out, and he wants a room. So she tells him the same story. He says, I'll take it. None of that stuff bothers me. I'm not scared of ghosts. Just give me the key. I'll take the room. So he goes upstairs, goes in, gets all comfortable, sits down on the edge of the bed, opens up his guitar case and takes out his guitar, and he begins to strum on it and sing. And out of that closet comes those bloody fingers. Bloody fingers. The man stops and he turns and he looks and he goes back to strumming the guitar and singing. And the fingers keep crawling. Bloody fingers. And they climb up the side of the bed. Bloody fingers. The man stops and he looks again. And this time they crawl on the bed. And they come towards the man playing the guitar. And the man sits there, and he's very quiet. And then he stops, and he listens. But they keep coming. Bloody fingers. Bloody fingers. So the man stops, and he turns around. He says, come on, man, get a Band-Aid. You thought I was going to scare you, didn't you? All right. Well, I thank you all very much, folks. If you have questions, I will be around. I will be glad to try to answer them. I hope you all have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Reading Aunt Jenny's life. This was just so great, and all the visuals you have here.
Thank you.
Tell us about them.
Well, basically what I usually do is just try to display some things that, in my mind, the way I think Aunt Jenny would have had things, and maybe some of her belongings, how they would have looked. And, of course, doing the herbs and the medicinal things. I try to think back to that period of time and some of the easily accessible medicinal plants that Aunt Jenny would have used. I certainly think that the pine and the plantain would have been some of them. Mullein was another one that I know that she would have used. There was even a huge plant, a mullein plant that was behind her home place out there. Sage, just a given. I'm sure she would have known some things besides dressing and sausage that sage were good for. We have broomcorn. I'm sure Aunt Jenny would have grown broomcorn. They definitely would have made their own brooms and dusting tools back then. There's so many other things that you can use broomcorn for, including corn silking tools.
I'm ashamed to say I don't know what broomcorn is.
Right there in that basket.
Oh, this long stuff?
Yes, ma'am.
The long things here.
Yes, ma'am. You would actually take like a cur comb, a horse cur comb, and actually brush this, and all of these seeds will come off. You would take these sections, and pardon me, this is actually tied together. These little knots here, so you would put these together and work them into a broom and trim this up, and you use string or wire and tie it together really tightly and put your handle on it, and you would have a handmade broom.
And you called it corn. It was from the corn plant?
Well, it is a different species, of course, but it is called broomcorn.
Oh,
mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yes. Of course, a nice hand-carved wooden bowl. You wouldn't have had nice fancy things back then. Most things were either handmade or carved, such as that. We have a jar of honey. I'm sure Aunt Jenny would have had access to honey, right? Yes. Definitely. We have a gourd, canteen gourd here, that could have been used for a number of things, whether it be a medicine, maybe a medicinal tea, or just a canteen full of water.
I've never seen a gourd made into this.
Right. Many gourds were used as canteens and such. But this one, of course, is done more on the native style. But there again, Aunt Jenny was half Cherokee, and who knows, it may have looked something like that.
That is interesting. Okay.
Of course, I always bring some medicinal herb books and things. I'm not sure Aunt Jenny would have had a lot of them, but I'm sure she had some. Greatly, yes.
Now the photo.
Yes, ma'am. This, of course, is Aunt Jenny probably when she was well on up into her years. This one on the wall is also Aunt Jenny.
Okay. Now, which one do you think was the oldest?
I believe this one probably was.
That's amazing. I didn't even know there were photos, actual photos of her.
Yes, ma'am, there are, and actually there are even some in her much younger days. She was a very dark-haired, blue-eyed Cherokee.
Oh, yes.
This stone is actually Aunt Jenny's first grave marker. And as you can tell, there are actually no carvings of names or dates or such as that, but I'm sure that somewhere along the way the family found this beautiful stone with these fossil-type flowers in it, and it was Aunt Jenny's headstone for many, many years until the family actually decided to have her a marble-type monument with names and dates put on there. The family actually took it. It was passed on to another lady, a Miss Ward, her family had been family friends with Aunt Jenny and her family, and it was in her possession for many, many years. And she became interested in the project that we're working on to have a monument and an actual bronze bust made of Aunt Jenny. And so she felt like that this should be put somewhere to be always to where it would be visible to the public and people could enjoy it for a long time to come. So it is my intention that once we get the bust built of Aunt Jenny, we place it over at the Oakville Indian Mounds. That is where we feel like would be one of the best locations. We have worked on several projects, as you well know, and have placed many monuments over at the old Houston jail. But though Aunt Jenny is very much claimed as a Winston County lady, she's claimed in Franklin County, but the Brooks family farm was more in Lawrence County. And also the fact that the Oakville Indian Mounds houses all those Indian type things, we just feel that it would be very fitting to put Aunt Jenny in Lawrence County over at the Oakville Indian Mound. So that is our goal, and if that happens, we intend to place this along with it.
So has her genealogy been done? She was proven to be part Cherokee?
Yes, ma'am. Her mother was Annie Brown from Kentucky, and she was full-blooded Cherokee Indian. Yes.
All right. So it's definite.
Oh, definite. Absolutely, it's definite. And I definitely believe that is where a great deal of her knowledge with the medicinal plants and her doctoring knowledge and just her ways of life came from. One of the things that I failed to mention during the program is the fact of Aunt Jenny having a human skull for a soap bowl. I spent a long, long time trying to prove that she did not. And in turn, all I did was prove that, yes, she did. I cannot tell you exactly who or what it belonged to, but it obviously, from all accounts, we have determined that it was probably that of one of those terrible Union soldiers, and I believe that he was killed upon that intrusion. And I believe that it is my opinion that he very likely could be the one that she used his skull as an example. I do not know that, but we do know that, yes, she did have a human skull for a soap bowl. I usually will question them. Did you ever hear anything about Aunt Jenny having a skull for a soap bowl? And always the answer is yes, and she did.
All her descendants.
Every descendant I've ever interviewed that knows anything about her, they say yes. I was always told, and I've had many people, older folks who knew Aunt Jenny personally, say that they saw that.
Well, it seemed like that she really was one to seek revenge, and she didn't soften until she was well at an advanced age.
Well, I think even before she joined the church and, as we say, softened, I believe Aunt Jenny was a remarkable lady and a very loving, very caring person even during those times. I think she just learned to be someone who was harder and tougher and definitely did things that maybe we wouldn't look upon today as being conventional, but it was simply a way of survival.
Think about it. Where's the law enforcement in those days? You had to take care of yourself.
Yes, ma'am. And speaking of that, and I don't believe I said that during the program tonight, that is always one thing that I usually do add. You didn't have 911. You usually had to take matters into your own hands, and especially during the days of the Civil War.
Oh, my. Like you pointed out, of both sides.
Yes. And Aunt Jenny and the Brooks family definitely had animosity and issues with the North and the South. Yes.
It was a matter of survival.
And definitely.
The property owner for many, many years, she goes down in history, is Aunt Jenny Johnston. And she lived to be 98 years old. She lived until March 29, 1924. This stone is so unusual. Dale, tell us about this.
Okay, the reason that they use this stone this size and put it down like this is because they have stolen her headstone about 15 or 20 times at least throughout the years. So ever since she's been buried here.